New measures to regulate the sale and recycling of edible oil. A referendum on Scottish independence is underway. And 15 people with suspected links to Islamic State extremist group swept up in raids in Australia. Good evening. The government has proposed a new set of measures to regulate and monitor edible oil in Hong Kong in an attempt to safeguard public health. This after the gutter oil scandal involving Taiwanese oil company Changwon and a local oil exporter sparked fears that substandard oil is widespread in the city's food chain. Diane To reports.
It's a public health issue that's disgusted people across Hong Kong, Taiwan and the Chinese mainland. So the Food and Health Bureau and the Environment Bureau put their heads together to figure out how to better regulate the use of oil in the food chain.
We agreed to instigate administrative and legislative measures to ensure the safety of edible oil in Hong Kong, as well as protect the reputation of Hong Kong.
He said his bureau is now looking into relevant legislation to require all edible oil manufactured in Hong Kong to fulfill certain requirements in future.
Namely, they cannot use substandard oil or recycled cooking oil as the ingredient for all Hong Kong manufactured edible oil.
A tracking mechanism has also been proposed. Edible oil importers will need an official certificate for the oil issued by the place of origin, and copies of the certificate will have to be given to the distributors or retailers for inspection. Food factories and eateries will need to hand over their used cooking oil to recyclers or collectors recognised by the Environmental Protection Department. All records have to be properly kept to prevent at source the used cooking oil from re-entering the food chain. And all edible oil exporters will need a licence to prove that their products meet statutory requirements. Details have yet to be worked out, and the government will launch a public consultation on these proposals at a later date. Luo Yuchun, chairman of the General Association of Recycling Business, welcomed the new measures, saying it could make the industry more standardized. He also suggested the government should make it mandatory to have the used oil marked with a dye, as is done with industrial diesel, to make it clear the oil is not for human consumption. Diane To, TVB News.
It's the moment of truth for Scotland and the United Kingdom, with millions casting their ballots on whether or not to leave the UK. Polls have indicated that the results will be close. Tony Sabine has more.
An air of excitement and anticipation descended on Scotland today as voters arrived at polling stations early to cast their ballots in the country's historic referendum on independence.
I think after 300 years we're due a change.
It's been a campaign that has, at times, been bitterly divided between the yes vote's optimistic vision for an independent Scotland and the no vote's persistent warnings of the dangers of leaving the UK.
I just don't believe that the yes campaign was convincing enough about, how it could go wrong. So they had all the best cases, but not the worst cases.
With polls showing that the margin of victory will be slim, British Prime Minister David Cameron admitted he was nervous, but optimistic Scotland would choose to stay.
I'm confident that we've set out how Scotland can have the best of both worlds, a successful economy combined with the ability of Scots, if they vote no, to have even more powers and even more say over how to run their own affairs in Scotland.
Cameron's been getting help from his old political rival and former British Prime Minister Gordon Brown, who made an impassioned appeal last night that Scotland and Britain are better together.
We built the peace together. We built the health service together. We built the welfare state together. We will build the future together. And what we have built together by sacrificing and sharing, let no narrow nationalism split asunder ever.
Scottish First Minister Alex Salmond, who's also the leader of the independence movement, disagreed and spoke of the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Scots to forge a new destiny for themselves.
No, but by voting yes, when we take into our hands is a responsibility like no other. The responsibility to work together to make Scotland a better nation. Are there challenges to overcome? Undoubtedly. But my question is this: who better to meet these challenges for this nation than the people who live and work in this nation?
Polls will close tomorrow at 5 a.m. Hong Kong time, but the final result may not be clear until lunchtime. Tony Sabine, TVB News.
Scots in Hong Kong, like those back home, are very concerned about the future of their country. Some are disappointed they weren't given a chance to vote.
Some people follow through on that hatred of English, and I don't like that that's been used.
Dave graduated from college 4 years ago, and like other young adults in Scotland, he couldn't find a job. He moved here and founded a rugby club which he currently manages. He's happy about his decision to move to Hong Kong, but recent news from back home has him worried.
I think there's an element of people voting because they have a dream that Scotland's going to be better on their own. If we're talking about the oil and that subsidising everything, if that dwindles down, well, we need to finance these things from within Scotland. My wife is Scottish. We've spoken about moving back, but there still doesn't seem to be huge opportunity for jobs.
I never meet someone and they say, "Where are you from?" I don't say the UK. I say I'm from Scotland.
Michael also came to Hong Kong 4 years ago. He got married and decided to put down roots here. As a Scot, he does not feel represented by the British government.
The people of Scotland, that's the population we have, 8.3%. That's what goes towards the general election votes. Yeah? But the government that's in charge, everyone in Scotland did not back the Conservatives, yet they are in charge. Why is that? Why do they get to govern a whole country of people that did not vote for them? I would consider moving back to Scotland with my wife if it's a yes vote.
They'll both be at the pub sipping scotch as they await the results. After all, despite their opposing views, they are both proud Scotsmen. A solemn ceremony took place this morning in the provincial capital of Liaoning to commemorate the 83rd anniversary of Japan's invasion of northeastern China. Shenyang is one of 15 Chinese cities where ceremonies were held today to mark the September 18th incident, the start of 14 years of Japanese aggression that lasted until the end of the Second World War. Politburo Standing Committee member Liu Yun-shan, war veterans and other officials rang a bell 14 times outside the September 18th Historical Museum. The city then sounded the warning siren for 3 minutes, while motorists and ship captains honked their horns. On September 18, 1931, Japanese troops blew up a section of the railway under their control near Shenyang and accused the Chinese of sabotage as a pretext for attack. Within 4 months, the Japanese forces occupied all 3 provinces in northeastern China and established a puppet state there in the following year. Police in Australia have detained 15 people believed to have connections with Islamic State in pre-dawn raids in Sydney and Brisbane. More than 800 police officers were involved in the security operation. Police say intelligence showed that militants connected with IS were planning to behead a member of the public in Sydney as a show of the group's reach. The raids came just days after Australia raised the national terror threat to high for the first time. Prime Minister Tony Abbott said they know of at least 100 Australians who are members of or support Islamic State and other terror groups.
There are, I regret to say, networks of people here in this country who, despite living here, despite enjoying the Australian way of life, they would do us harm. And it's very important that our police and security organisations be one step ahead of them. And I think this morning they were.
The US House of Representatives has approved President Barack Obama's request to fund the arming and training of moderate rebels battling Islamic State militants in Syria. But questions remain over whether it will be enough to defeat IS. Alan Buckner reports.
Prior to the vote, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry repeated Obama's pledge that there would be no American ground troops sent into battle in Iraq or Syria.
We will be expanding the military campaign to take on ISIL in Iraq, in Syria, wherever it is found. But this is not the Gulf War in 1991. It is not the Iraq War in 2003. U.S. ground troops will not be sent into combat in this conflict.
Republican Party hawks called the plan too little, too late.
This amendment does not crush the Islamic State. What this amendment does is start training Islamists to fight Islamists, and we may have that Islamist army to fight Islamists in a matter of a few years. I will not vote for something that I know will not work.
Still, the House of Representatives easily passed the plan by a vote of 273 to 156, with the majority of both Democrats and Republicans voting in favor. President Obama welcomed the bipartisan support.
America is now positioned better than we could have ever imagined if we continue to act in the interests of all of us, and if every once in a while we're willing to set aside politics and try to get something done.
In his first interview with foreign media since taking office in September, Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi also welcomed the move to target Islamic militants in Syria as well as Iraq. But he strongly rejected the idea of the international coalition being formed to help fight against IS, sending any ground forces to his country.
The only contribution the American forces or the international coalition is going to help us with is from the sky. And I have to make this very clear. We are not giving any blank check to the international coalition to hit any target in Iraq. Every target that is hit must be approved by us, or we ask for it.
The U.S. Senate still has to pass the Obama plan. That's expected later today or Friday. Alan Buckney, TVB News.
And back to local news, the Hong Kong Federation of Students is facing obstacles to host rallies at Tamar Park during its class boycott next week. Rani Samtani has more.
The Federation of Students will launch its week-long class boycott next Monday afternoon with a rally at the Chinese University. From Tuesday till Friday, the student group plans to hold gatherings at Tamar Park along with seminars that will run from 10 a.m. until midnight. But it has yet to receive approval from the authorities.
We do not want the police or the other government people to have too much oppression on the assembly, on a peaceful assembly of students, so that we sincerely hope that they won't decline or deny our application anymore. Otherwise, they're pushing us to have civil disobedience.
The Federation's earlier application to hold a rally outside the east wing of the former central government offices was rejected, and so the group contacted the Civil Human Rights Front to help them apply for a letter of no objection from the police and the Leisure and Cultural Services Department to use Tamar Park instead. But the Federation of Students says the department is imposing unreasonable restrictions. Officials have told the Federation that it has to buy an insurance policy with $10 million in coverage and that they will not be allowed to park their electricity generator vehicle near Tamar Park. Since the group will be making noise, the students will only be allowed to assemble on 3 days until 11 p.m. The Federation said they will continue discussing with the department. Meanwhile, the Civil Human Rights Front's application for using Victoria Park as the starting point for a march on October 1st has been turned down. The Leisure and Cultural Services Department, or LCSD, told them their application could not be approved. That's because last December, the Home Affairs Department applied for permission to hold events on the football pitches at Victoria Park on October 1st, and consent was already given to the department. Director of the LCSD, Michelle Lee, said not more than one group can use the same site at the same time. Rani Samtani, TVB News.
In Champions League action, it was not a good night for English teams. Chelsea could only manage a draw against Germany's Schalke, while Manchester City fell to German giants Bayern Munich. Here's Jameson Wong.
Bayern Munich's Jerome Boateng scored a last-minute winner against his former team. The German champion